Okay. I was gonna be nice.
Satire television is a crucial part of both American comedy and politics, regardless of whether it's hilarious.
Deep dish pizza is not only not better than New York pizza, it's not pizza.
I was truly gratified recently to see that even after the things I've said about Muslims, I received a contribution from Arab American viewer Suck Madik.
Or serious.
We gotta do whatever we can to keep Americans safe. 9 people shot in a church. What about that? Hey, what are you gonna do? Crazy is as crazy is, right? That's the part that I cannot, for the life of me, wrap my head around.
Amber Day is the author of Satire and Dissent and teaches a course of political satire at Bryant University.
Stewart, was such a force. He had really kind of hit a nerve for a lot of people in that, he was at a moment where there wasn't a lot of amazing satire on television, right? And he was sort of doing such a good job of pulling the tape on politicians and kind of showing, where they were contradicting themselves.
Since 2015, when Stewart left The Daily Show and Colbert abandoned his Comedy Central character to join CBS, satire television is very different today than even 5 years ago.
I think in particular, people like John Oliver and Hassan Minhaj for a little while, delving into that kind of long form, almost more like magazine style journalism and doing these pieces on, it's not that they weren't topical, but almost investigative reporting.
Satire was shifting towards more investigative reporting. Then Trump happened.
Yes, I think comedy has changed in the Trump era.
Jeffery Jones is the executive director of the Peabody Awards and has authored multiple books on satire television.
I think the shows have become much more pointed, much more directed toward a niche audience. It's not so niche if it's 78 million people, and those are just the voters, but people that clearly feel like Trump is bad. And then the other is that Trump presents so much comedic material. I mean, as a norms buster, there's no way that one would ignore or try to treat in a both sidesism kind of way what Trump has done.
Last Week Tonight has seemingly gotten more serious. Do you think that that has kind of evolved across all the mediums, or just last week?
I think you're right. I mean, I think a lot, and I think that gets into the sort of how it's changed across the Trump presidency, that a lot of the shows have gotten more earnest. And it's interesting, actually, if you're looking at the pieces, the really earnest ones, like how they are clearly following a formula of like fart or sex joke every, 30 seconds or so, right, to sort of break it up.
And that's where I wanted to see if there was a way to prove statistically that satire television is in a new era. Specifically, that Last Week Tonight with John Oliver is more serious after the Trump administration. While my data gathering process could easily be seen as screwing around, I remember the first rule of research from the legendary Adam Savage from Mythbusters.
Remember, kids, the only difference between screwing around and science is writing it down.
So I started on a 30-episode binge of Last Week Tonight's main story, 15 before Trump was elected and 15 after. I recorded, or wrote down as Mr. Savage likes to call it, the number of jokes per segment, the total length of jokes per segment, and assigned an overall tone of the piece on a scale of 1 to 10. It may seem obvious, but for my data gathering process, here's an example of a joke and its timed length.
66%! When that much of your budget comes from fines, you're actually rooting for people to break the law. Listen, everyone, we're going to have to close the library unless someone urinates up that wall and the rest of us start driving like maniacs. So put the pedal to the metal, let's do it for the kids.
And since my tone scale is somewhat arbitrary, here's an example of a story I gave a tone of 1.
Please, make Sepp Blatter go away. I will do anything. Adidas, I'll wear one of your ugly shoes. One of these shoes.
And here's an example of a story which had a tone of 10 out of 10.
I paid him $2,000 one time when I got my income tax. And then that was in February. And in March, I just didn't have anything else to give him.
That is awful. Now, the Southern Poverty Law Centre eventually managed to get her out of jail after 10 days, arguing that she'd been sent to what was effectively a debtor's prison, something that was supposed to have been fucking outlawed in America in the 1830s.
And after 9 hours of main stories, aided by nearly 500 milligrams of caffeine, here's what the data said. There is an observed drop after Trump's inauguration in both jokes as a percentage of the main story and in jokes per minute. However, it's not as drastic as you might think. The percent of the show devoted to jokes dropped by 14%, or 2.2 points. Similarly, the show dropped 15% in terms of jokes per minute. It averaged 1.7 jokes per minute before to 1.4 afterwards. Surprisingly, from the 30 shows I watched, the tone actually softened post-Trump, from 4.7 out of 10 before to 3.6 afterwards. While the data supports some observation, it doesn't support a sharp before and after.
We always want to divide the world into easy before and afters, like pre 9/11, post 9/11. I'm sure we're going to get, for the next, until I'm dead, we're going to be hearing about post-COVID, moment.
Jonathan Gray is a professor in media and cultural studies at the University of Wisconsin. And so even if we can't necessarily divide satire into an easy before and after, where does satire television go from here?
But I think as we've seen as sort of journalists, there's a lot of things that they can't do and that they won't do. And that satirists have picked up this ball. And I think we've had enough years of it now that I'm sure the next generation of satirists are going to be doing this too. I mean, the only thing that I would expect that will be changing is it won't be as centered on TV.
In Chicago, Jake Bermonde, Medill reports.